mental plane, number 5 is here. One of whose symbols is the 5-pointed star, the star of humanity, of man, of manas. Man really actually comes from the word manas, or mind, which is what we're developing, along with the heart, of course. And the 3 higher subplanes here are the seat of the soul, the causa body. And when we count from above down, the first subplane, the second subplane, the third subplane, those 3 higher subplanes are called the abstract subplanes, or the abstract mind. The lower 4 subplanes represent the concrete mind. And so this class is going to be differentiating between those 2 levels. We've reached this point in the 5th root race, and the so-called 555, as they call it. The 5th branch race, the 5th sub-race, of the 5th root race, where the concrete mind has been developed very powerfully, too powerfully in some ways, as I've probably mentioned before. And of course, the lower subplanes of the mental plane contain the mental unit, or the mental permanent atom. I beg your pardon, the mental unit, as it's called. The mind, you will see the monastic or mental permanent atom is up here on the first subplane, and that, just briefly, that atom is linked to the Buddhic permanent atom and the atmic permanent atom. This triangle here is the so-called spiritual triad, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, which is something we can explore further on down the track. And so the lowest aspect of this triangle is the seat of the soul. This intuition I was talking about before in the horoscope with Neptune relates to Buddhi, or this 4th plane. This is the goal for all of humanity to reach ultimately, and we get flashes of intuition and many steps along the way to that goal. This is the plane of liberation, in fact, ultimately. Anyway, so and of course we have this 5th plane blown up here in this other diagram to the right. I think you can see most of it there. All right, so we move on. We have here on the left an ancient painting of Gemini, the twins, the warring brothers, so called, and you can call the lower and higher mind the warring brothers in many ways, quite often, or the soul and the personality, soul on the higher subplanes, and the most powerful aspect of the personality, depending where you're polarized, on the lower subplanes. And quite often the personality is resistant to the impress of the soul, and likewise the higher mind, lower mind can have that clash as well. Excuse me. So the mental or monastic plane is that plane or region of consciousness that exists between the astral and the Buddhic planes, while simultaneously coexisting and interpenetrating the other 6 planes. See, we are looking at this 2-dimensional diagram before, but really we can see it as all these planes kind of interpenetrating each other. Perhaps a better visualization would be concentric circles, which are more 4th-dimensional in their expression. The mental planes divide into 7 gradual subplanes of mental substance, matter, and into 2 regions of thought. And as I mentioned in other classes, these subplanes and the planes in general are made up of devic substance, as we call it, elemental substance of lesser or greater refinement. The lower mental world is the region of concrete thought, where the highest aspect of the human personality functions. As I said before, the personality is the lower mind, the astral body, and the physical etheric body, working as one relatively integrated unit. When we do the meditation, we try and bring all those 3 aspects of ourselves together in a functioning whole. We visualize them coming together like that. The lower or concrete mind is the mortal mind that uses the physical brain as its instrument. Okay. The higher mental world is the region of abstract thought where the lowest aspect of the human soul functions. So when I use the term mortal mind, we're talking about Gemini again. We have the mortal brother, the personality, and we have the immortal brother, which is the soul. And I've written about this many times in my various newsletters over the years. You can find more material, that material on my website and in my books. But the other thing to note here is that the mind uses the brain. The mind is the software, and the brain is the hardware. In most modern day science, they still think, generally, for the majority, that everything originates in the brain. There's no consideration, although they're working towards that more and more. There's no consideration of the actual software that's working through the brain, the instrument of the brain. The higher abstract mind is the relatively immortal mind, the Gemini brothers. Manas, the mental principle, is actually the link or bridge between the personality and the soul, the principle through which the personality is integrated and aligned with the soul. So at individualization in Lemuria 21.6 million years ago, as I discuss in my videos and books, the individualization occurred through the spark of mind being implanted in humanity, which allowed the causal bodies of the soul to be formed, individual souls. Before that, they were basically as one group soul. So that individualization process kick-started, if you like, the evolution of consciousness since then. The lower mind is used to calm and discipline the emotional nature. The higher mind is used to bring the lower mind under the control of the soul. So we can see how each higher plane has a controlling influence of the plane below it. The lower mind is used to synthesize and integrate the personality into a single vibration that the personality might be used more effectively. The higher mind is used to bridge the gap between buddhi and the lower self. For this reason, the utilization of abstract and subjective studies and meditations encourages the building of the vital bridge between a soul and its personality. There's something to bear in mind here, is that all creative people are tapping into the higher three subplanes of the mental plane, the abstract mind, whether it's in business, music, the arts, any field of human activity which can be considered creative and related to higher learning, in fact. Though mental development is a prerequisite for intuitional development, mind, the head, should be properly balanced with the heart, as we see the gentleman here on the tightrope, where it says, your worst battle is between what you know and what you feel, which is kind of a little bit misleading esoterically anyway, because being of the heart is not necessarily, shouldn't be confused with the feeling nature, the emotional nature, although the emotional body is related closely to the heart's expression. So, head and heart, walk that tightrope. As these two aspects of head and heart develop, the student should be guided by a spiritual motive and common sense rather than rationalization. This is what the lower mind does, of course. It rationalizes. True reasoning is buddhi manas, the abstract mind enlightened by the intuition. The other planet associated with intuition besides Neptune is Mercury. In fact, Mercury rules this fourth plane of perception, the intuitional or buddhic plane, whereas Venus is the ruler, is the mental factor in esoteric astrology. It rules the fifth ray of knowledge. it rules the mental plane. Neptune, the god of the waters, of course, rules the astral plane. And so, again, even though I said Neptune relates to Buddhi, as does Mercury, if a person's emotional body is purged and purified, then it will become a clear reflector of the Buddhic consciousness coming through from a higher Buddhic realm. It bypasses the mental plane straight to the emotional body, particularly if you are polarized, if you're what we call an astral Buddhic sort of person. Okay, so the mental body uses the physical brain as its vehicle. Most scientists think that consciousness resides in the brain, as I said, but it only expresses through it. Mental body is the software, the brain is the hardware. The higher abstract mind, the three higher subplanes, are the realm of causal ideas. They are synthetic, conceptual, holistic, creative, philosophical, has the large macro view, are intangible, esoteric, and the so-called feminine. The intuition can be, as well as the higher abstract mind, can both be called the so-called feminine, which is, again, a somewhat misleading term, but it is correct in many ways. The lower mind, the four subplanes of the lower mind, are the effects of ideas. And there you have the rational mind, the intellectual mind, the analytical mind, the logical, discriminating, factual micro-view, the tangible, the exoteric, and hence the masculine. And quite often in heterosexual relationships, the man quite often has the masculine, concrete mind well developed, and the woman has the intuition, not necessarily the higher abstract mind developed, but that is more intuitive. That's just a very general measure, of course. The abstract mind is the seat of the soul and supersedes the limitations of the concrete mind. Of course, meditation builds the bridge in between. In this picture here, we have a representation of the Atha Karana, or the rainbow bridge, between lower self and higher self, or you could even say it might be between the monad and the soul, in fact. All right, any comments or questions so far? Okay. A lot to take in here, I realise. So Karen is asking, how about the spiritual heart? I can't pronounce that. Iridium. Well, I'm not sure about your question, Karen. What about the spiritual heart? The heart is a spiritual organ, the heart center, of course, and the physical heart, of course, is closely allied to the heart center. And Karen's asking, how is this in relation to the mental body? Well, they are both they are connected, but they are both different paths of unfoldment. For instance, the more we know and understand through spiritual knowledge that we absorb, it can bring about a greater expansiveness of the heart in terms of compassion and understanding, of a heart understanding as opposed to a head understanding. And the broader the heart expands, then that also conversely brings mental understanding. These are the two inextricably entwined paths of human evolution that we balance from lifetime to lifetime. Some of us are more polarized in the head, others are more polarized in the heart. Others, of course, have a good balance of both. And the way of the heart is the way of the mystic, and the way of the head is the way of the occultist. And again, both those paths have to be balanced. If someone develops too much on the mystic or occult path in one life or another, they have to come back and have a correctional incarnation, so to speak, to balance that which has been overdeveloped in previous lives. So that's the short answer anyway. Good question though. All right. Meditation builds the bridge in between, and that bridge is the Adhkarana, the rainbow bridge, which we haven't had a class in that yet, have we? But we will. All right, the chakras related to the mental body are primarily the throat, the ajna, and the head. There's the throat center, the 16-petaled throat center, the ajna, the 96 petals of the ajna center, of course the head center, the 1,000-petal lotus. The head center synthesizes every other chakra in the body. And there's all sorts of interesting mathematics and sums that you can do by adding the numbers of the petals of the various chakras. The mental aura is orange or yellow, and the thoughts within the mental body are geometrical shapes, thought forms. We'll have another class on thought forms, or we had one already, I can't remember. And they exist within the aura. The size of the aura is 3 to 4 feet or 1.4 meters on the average. The lower mind toxins of the concrete mind or the lower mind are criticism, judgmentalism, pedantic, separativeness, superiority, pride, and mental cruelty. You can recognize some of these keywords in the astrological signs like Leo or Capricorn or Aries, for instance, and also, of course, some of the keywords for the 9-headed Hydra of Scorpio. So we have here one representation of thought forms, the geometrical patterns that exist on the mental plane that have been there for millennia, created by past initiates of the race, and to which we can all reach and access to the so-called rain cloud of noble things. All right. So the world has reached a point in the development of the fifth root race, the 5.5.5, where 20 to 30% of the population can be considered mentally polarized. The other 70 to 80% are still astrally polarized. This is paraphrased from an actual quote by the Tibetan in one of the blue books. It's quite an astonishing statement, isn't it? But because just as we only have about 63 masters that run the planet, so to speak, so this 20 to 30% of the population carry the entire fifth root race in terms of mental polarization, the thinkers, the philosophers, the scientists, and so forth, who are the leading minds of humanity. And of course, the rest of humanity follow behind and are rapidly expanding, in fact, their consciousness. We're having a really accelerated period of that right now, in fact, I think. And as a result, of course, they are reversing the wheel and taking initiation. Keys to mental development. Someone in the chat there. Rachel says, what do you mean by polarized, please? Polarized between what? Well, polarization represents, you're talking about two poles, polarized to the left or to the right in your politics, for instance. You're polarized in Sagittarius or in Gemini, the opposite sign. You have the two poles of the planet, the North Pole and the South Pole. So polarization means a swinging to one pole or the other. And when we talk about people in psychology being bipolar, that's exactly what happens. They swing from one pole to the other. Quite common in people with strong fourth ray in their makeup, the fourth ray of harmony through conflict. which is the ray that rules over humanity, of course. So it's a very common thing these days because the human race is becoming much more mentally polarized because of this acceleration of mental development. Also, a proper balance of the head and heart centers, the development of suitable character, temperament, and values, a willingness to consider the relativity of manifesting existence. This is one of the major keys to mental advancement, to not be pedantic and locked in one particular viewpoint, which is very much the concrete mind. The aspirant must effectively live in both worlds without being wholly distracted by either. The lower world yields opportunities for needed experience and expression, whilst the higher world offers evolutionary encouragement and freedom. And this is somewhat of that old biblical saying, to live in the world but not of it, with all its mare and its glamour and illusion and so forth. Of course, illusion is that which pertains to the mental plane in particular, whereas glamour is specifically the astral plane, and maya, the etheric physical. Excuse me. So, realization of the existence of illusion is a necessary condition to passing above and beyond illusion. And here we have this illusory picture here, which is quite hard to focus on. It can make you a bit dizzy, in fact, if you look at it for too long. So mental advancement refers to the development of the concrete mind and the intellect. Real mental development refers to the tempering of the concrete mind and intellect and their subordination to the expression of the higher self. Really good statement, that one. Today we have an overexpression of polarization in the concrete mind, which is the shadow of the fifth root race that has resulted in the many abuses of science. We've seen this in particular in the last few years. And it's interesting that we're going into the age of Aquarius, which only takes the fifth ray of science or knowledge through it. And so, in a sense, the point of least resistance of any new cycle we go into is the lower expression or the shadow expression of a sign, of a ray, etc. The real key to the successful purification of the personality is mental discipline. Mental impression upon the physical and emotional nature evokes sublimation and integration. Without a strong, disciplined mind, it would be difficult to encourage and achieve alignment of the physical and astral bodies with the mind. Without the will, which works through the mind, determination, purpose, and reasonableness of the mind, the resistance of the lower self would preclude integration. So, the Tibetan often mentions in the blue books the not permitting certain lines of thought, to be so vigilant and on guard with yourself. Like, for instance, when you're tired, your mind might wander and go from one thing to another, or go into a kind of astral fantasy. This is very common for all of us, of course, at some point or other. Yet, if one is a regular meditator, this certainly strengthens the vigilance and the discipline factor. One can catch oneself out, so to speak, and bring oneself back to center. And we do this, of course, in meditation when we're going through the first phase of meditation, which is concentration. The most difficult for all beginners in meditation, where the mind wanders, and before you know it, you realize you've just been off astral tripping, as I call it, for 5 minutes, and you bring yourself back when you realize you've done that, and the mind. But you can do this in any time of the day, of course, whether you're in the supermarket or driving to have that vigilance, have that uh, the ability to catch yourself out and to not permit certain lines of thought, which might be self-destructive, for instance, putting yourself down, or by many myriad of thoughts or ideas. So the real mental development refers to the tempering of the concrete mind and intellect. The real key to the successful purification of the personality is mental discipline. I think I mentioned that. Yes, mentioned all those things. So this problem, as I regard it, of the concrete mind being so overdeveloped in one sense, but also underdeveloped for the majority of humanity, is the shadow of the fifth root race. We have many intelligent people who are scientific in their approach to researching the mysteries, for instance, but find it very difficult to meditate. Hence, they might resort to psychedelics, ayahuasca, or other substances to break free out of their mental constraints. And there are many well-known people who do this or advocate this, and yet that was, we are told, the way of the Atlantean consciousness or root race, and that in this root race, the Raja Yoga is the kingly science that we really need to practice to bring about that mental discipline of the lower astral plane in particular. And what psychedelics and drugs do is, of course, stimulates and opens up the astral plane. And that can be quite creative for some people, but ultimately it is not the path forward. It might be a stepping stone for people. Of course, just as the 60s were in 1960s in the last century, were a stepping stone for many people to shake themselves out of their concrete mind conditioning and explore the path of meditation and so forth, Eastern philosophies, etc. Now, the word probationer is used for someone who is on probation on the inner planes, who has been, who is an aspirant to the mysteries and is approaching the ashram and has been put on probation, so to speak. As a probationer, the mind is used to guide the emotional physical instrument to impress upon it, I should say, goal or purpose intended. As the physical astral bodies become more responsive to the mental influence, the more important it is to have the mind self-disciplined. When the mind becomes strong and influential, the mental deficiencies become amplified in their effects upon the lower nature. A careless thought, for example, can encourage emotional distraction or even physical vulnerability, so long as the lower self is responsive to the mental activity. So mental discipline must be maintained if the soul is to properly express itself through an integrated personality, obviously. And a thing to mention here is that throughout our lives, we all have a horoscope. We all have transits continually to our horoscope, long-term and short-term transits and progressions that activate particular challenges like this at various times. For instance, Saturn, which has a lot to do with the mind, being squared by Pluto may bring some of these challenges to the surface. There are many other examples too. That's just one. So we can plot this in our horoscope if we know a little bit about the essential foundation of the horoscope, and uh, and track the basic transits um, to it over various time periods. So mental discipline must be maintained if the soul is to properly express itself through an integrated personality. And these days we are really challenged to do that because there are so many emotional um, hot button issues going on the planet that make us angry about the perceived injustice or imbalance of the world. And that's something that comes from the emotional body. And you may have noticed even in your local neighbourhood, many people are losing it these days in the supermarket or in public in one way or another because of this incredible pressure that has been building up, and which is part of this path of awakening that's happening en masse and, of course, initiation. This picture on the left here is by the New York artist Alex Gray, who was, in fact, or still is, a major exponent and promoter of ayahuasca. And the visions that he had and created this extraordinary range of paintings of these kind of see-through pictures of the etheric and astral bodies, the chakras, um, and this is just one of those in those series that most of you are familiar with. The concrete mind must be purified and disciplined, or else the mind will become too strong and independent, as is its nature anyway, and unresponsive to the soul, a common problem today. I'm repeating a few things in this presentation. It doesn't hurt to repeat to come at it from a different angle. Again, this is similar to what I was saying with the Gemini twins, the lower self, um, willful and or willfully ignorant in many ways, and deaf to the impression of the soul. The mind is potentially one of the greatest aids, at the same time is potentially quite a hindrance to the spiritual path. But the mind is necessary. You know. The disciplined and elevated mind is a great asset to an incarnating soul. The independent and unresponsive mind is one of the most difficult obstacles to be faced by the soul. So there's a paradox here, obviously. We're developing mind, we're expanding the mental consciousness, but at the same time, if we have an uneven development, then we'll become lopsided in our expression. And we all know people who are lopsided in their expression, including ourselves, of course, at various stages of our lives, or even now. We go through these, again, we swing from one pole to the other. We balance the pairs of opposites upon the emotional plane and upon the mental plane. This is a continuous process for all of us. Again, symbolized in the horoscope with through the 6 pairs of zodiac signs. So where the mind is relatively weak, the emotions are usually quite a problem. But in the later stages of probationary effort, it is the mind that must be dealt with. That its separative and critical tendencies might be transformed into a unified or coherent and spiritually responsive mechanism. So the critical mind is the shadow of the fifth root race in many ways. It's we talk about critical thinking, which is a different thing. Critical thinking is really, is really looking at things factually and weighing things up. But criticism is obviously uh, the shadow of that Western mind tendency to separate and to categorize that the concrete or raw mind does. So the mind is presently the primary instrument of experience intended for humanity, but the mind must be tamed and harnessed to be useful. Hence again, meditation, meditation, meditation. um, Even if you didn't read anything or study anything, meditating properly will go a long way towards one's development. But the Tibetan often mentions the triangle of service, meditation, and study. Service being at the top of the triangle in terms of the first ray of will or power. Meditation being at the second point of the triangle in terms of love, wisdom, and the opening of the heart. And the study being at the third point, the third ray of active intelligence, of knowledge. It's a ray of knowledge like the fifth ray. Of course, we have a synthesizing principle in that triangle, that pyramid, being the eye of buddhi or intuition. So the critical lower mind represents difficulties well into the path, well along the way of advanced evolution. It stays with us for quite a long time. Opinions must be dissolved as the lower mind is uplifted into the higher, and as mental attachments are transformed into freedom and realization. Yet many people are only just developing opinions, and of course can be opinionated, but that is part of people developing the concrete mind and being able to think independently and critically. They develop opinions based upon that kind of basic thinking. Yet at some point down the track, what was an asset now becomes an obstacle and must be relinquished. So opinions must be dissolved as mental attachments are transformed into freedom and realization. The observational and analytical capability of the mind can be turned inward so that the mind is aware of the state of mind, so to speak. Through that awareness, the mind can be trained and programmed for self-discipline, and the disciplined mind that is free from attachment is a mind that can respond easily to the higher internal guidance and express the soul energies through the personality quite effectively. The outward objective mental capabilities are then magnified in usefulness. Now, some of you are probably readers of scientific literature. There are quite a few famous scientists around who have a high public profile, but are totally in the realm of the concrete mind and of the extensive knowledge that they've garnered. But it is unalloyed with wisdom, and in some cases is detrimental to them and to the people who follow them. But this is all part of human learning, of course. The book Glamour, A World Problem, I highly recommend. We're going to have 3 classes on it. Is it next term or the term after? I can't remember now, but we'll go into more detail about the illusions that we create for ourselves on the mental plane. Anyone who is mentally polarized is stepping into the realm of illusion. And of course, we are all emotional beings as well. So we suffer from all 3 aspects, illusion, glamour, and maya, to one degree or another, depending on our individual polarization. The outward objective mental capabilities are then magnified in usefulness. And so this diagram here is a good representation of the concrete mind with all the cogs and wheels. In fact, when you see some people thinking, you can almost hear the wheels turning as they're trying to figure things out. We all do it, of course. Mental discipline. This is the cover of a book. I thought it was quite a good picture. A complete guide to Control your thoughts, increase your willpower, and achieve more. This is your basic ABCs of esotericism or New Age thought, as it's called. And obviously, this person is in the saddle, so to speak, riding the brain, controlling. And another thing just to mention here, we have, of course, these two major qualities in the first ray and the second ray of willpower and love wisdom. Will works through the mental body more readily, and the second ray of love wisdom works through the Buddhic plane and the emotional plane more readily. These are their points of least resistance. So a key to proper mental discipline is the balance of head and heart, as we've said before. Neither unrestrained emotion nor an undisciplined mind is of much use to the soul. But where the head and heart work together, being mutually and coherently responsive to the soul, then there is achievement leading to effective discipleship. This word discipleship, which inherently means discipline of the lower self. That is created, of course, over many lifetimes. After stepping onto the path, the many lives after that lead to initiation and ultimately liberation. Of course, these words are related to discernment, discrimination, that Greek suffix, prefix, die, meaning two, between two things. Again, we have this idea of polarization. And of course, Advaita Vedanta teaches the non-dual path. So we live in a world full of dichotomies. There's that word again, die, or dualities, and we're seeking to synthesize all those opposites into a unity. Right. So put some more light on the scene here. It is the purified heart, the mystical nature, that can temper the mind and keep the mental nature from the distractions and illusions of independence. This independent mind, we hear people talking about the independence of thought, but the independent mind at the expense of working with the higher self is the problem. As unnecessary illusion and independence are overcome, the reality of interdependence and true freedom is made manifest. Interdependence, there is a key word there. With continual mental discipline and an integrated personality, the work of the soul can proceed without hindrance. So we've probably all of us missed soul messages at one stage of our lives or another, through being submerged in emotional turmoil, or having too much activity in the lower mind that acts as a barrier essentially to the higher self being able to get through. The lower mind must be properly cultivated, for conscious and unconscious thoughts can have quite potent effects on relationships and experiences. Of course, all thought is karma engendering. Whether that thought doesn't get to the point of speech or to action, it's still karma engendering. So we have to guard our thoughts with care in terms of keeping a healthy space in all our relationships. And of course, most of us have experienced the imposition of thought from someone else, from someone we know. It might be a negative thought, it might be a positive thought. Thoughts are things; they travel, and we all share the same etheric space in terms of the thought processes. As the mind is properly disciplined and balanced, the student can progress more reasonably. Man is slowly becoming polarized on the mental plane and must be encouraged to be careful in the creation of thought forms. There's a whole bunch of thought forms up there on the mental plane. The Tibetan refers to this continually Some of them not very well formed, very vague and nebulous, with emotional energy, and which, as a result, die of attrition. They don't go anywhere. Whereas on the opposite end, you have highly refined, highly polished, if you like, geometrical thought forms, which are essentially blueprints to human living, which we can all contact and which precipitate to the physical plane ultimately because of their geometrical nature. So, and we remind ourselves of the Noble Eightfold Path of the Buddha, right understanding in the thought process, right thought, that leads to right speech, that leads to right action, etc., etc. Right concentration down the bottom there. The effect of a person's thinking will generally appear in the emotional and physical life. Good, sound, positive thinking encourages health, while bad, negative, selfish thinking encourages disease on the mental, emotional, and physical levels. Of course, the New Age bookstores are full of books like this. How to do this, how to do that, with your emotional body, with your mental body, with your etheric body in terms of physical health. And they are the basics. And they are based on the esoteric laws, of course. Man is becoming a creator. His creative thoughts are archetypes which precede and condition physical manifestation. The mental plane is the realm of consciousness that includes thought forms that have been consciously or unconsciously created. Much of man's misery comes from careless thinking. The evolving spiritual student is cautioned to think consciously, guard against careless and critical thoughts, and use the mind constructively. Easier said than done. We can all slip up in that respect. And the other thing to mention about man becoming a creator mentally is that we're getting to a point now in human evolution where there is a great arrogance that surrounds mental development and thinking, where there are statements by various philosophers or scientists who say, we don't need God, we can play God ourselves now. And this is one of the things that's been unfolding in the last couple of years that we're becoming far more aware of, and which, of course, is cause for concern. So much of man's misery, yes, I mentioned that. Okay. Still no comments or questions? Here we have an interesting diagram with some of the zodiac signs. In fact, a man with his heart in the center, or his third eye, which is a different thing, inside the horoscope wheel. Mentally polarized people are generally more mature and relatively more stable or coherent than physically or emotionally polarized people. They are far less vulnerable to external astral forces, but may still be subject to worldly thought impression. So a good example here is a major kind of public accident, for instance, where people are losing it emotionally, and yet you might have one or two people who are cool, calm, and collected. There's your mental polarization, and not being affected by the turmoil of the event that's unfolding. Mentally polarized people are integrated personalities, generally. The achievement of mental polarization implies the integration of the mind, the emotional nature, and the body under the central qualification of the concrete mind, and therefore relatively stronger from the perspective of the soul. So those mentally polarized people can be considered as having fourth subplane matter of the mental plane matter, coherent and optimized within their being. It's a sign of mental advancement or um, mental polarization. Let's just go back to the diagram for a moment. Because most humans in their thinking processes are what we call karma manas or desire mind, as I've probably mentioned before, which are these higher subplanes of the emotional plane mixed with the lower subplanes of the concrete plane of the lower mind. Karma manas, desire, which is emotional mind, desire mind. That's where the general population's polarization is at in karma manas. Not purely emotional, not purely mental. So the challenge for the mentally polarized student is just as great as that of the emotionally polarized student. It is just different and relatively more subtle. The emotionally polarized student seeks to cultivate the mind and conquer the astral nature with its various appetites. The mentally polarized student must contend with the more subtle problems of ego and the strength of the mind. It's interesting that we use ego for the lower self or personality, as in, but in the higher sense, it is the ego is another word for the soul. Ego with a capital E. Ego as in egg, as in that causal body shape, egg-shaped vehicle that is the vehicle of the soul. So I have reached the last slide. Therefore, we have plenty of time for discussion and questions, which we've got one here. Does genetics affect, Pam says, does genetics affect the development of the mind and emotional body? There are genetic codes that affect our ability to process emotions and anxiety. Yes, I think so. But of course, just as the brain is an instrument for the mental body, um, it doesn't necessarily proceed that genetics comes first and the effect comes later. But there are genetic predispositions, of course, to certain diseases. For instance, what's the diabetes, for instance, and diabetes is related to sugar, the pancreas, and which is an endocrine gland for the solar plexus center, the seat of the emotional body. And a soul can choose to incarnate in a family line that has a particular genetic predisposition that will accent or not lessons that they need to learn mentally or emotionally in one lifetime or another. Or, of course, the genetics of karma. Most karma works out through the physical body, as DK tells us in the book Esoteric Healing. And so we can choose a body that will have certain karmic impediments or weaknesses in it that will uh, host a certain working out of a particular type of karma. Ruby says, hang on a minute. Ruby says, if autistic people are more polarized in the mental body, how can they balance the emotional body? Well, I'm not sure whether autistic people are more polarized in the mental body. Has there been, are you thinking of some research paper or something like that, Ruby? Or are you just putting that out there as an example? Autism is a unique phenomena in this day and age. I'm not sure whether it was just as prevalent in ancient times or whether it's more to do with our unfoldment of consciousness in the human race now, or whether it's to do with people who are more intuitive or have special skills where one part of the brain is perhaps not functioning, but it allows other things to be developed. Another example might be someone who uh, has deafness. We're getting to the realm of karma here now, but they may have chosen to incarnate in physical forms that had a congenital sort of hearing issues over generations. And so being deaf can be a real challenge, but it can also bring forth the higher intuition. So I'm not really sure how to answer your question there, Ruby, but there's a stab at it there. Diane says, does DK mention any particular type of meditation that can help one to develop mental discipline? Well, I think he mentions it a lot through, he gives several meditations throughout the books for various groups and individuals. But essentially, the mental discipline comes back to this first stage of meditation, which is concentration. And it takes a lot of willpower to concentrate. You have to really invoke your will, your spiritual will, not necessarily your lower will, which is in the solar plexus, to be able to develop good concentration powers. And some people are better at it than others and have the astrological predisposition as well. For instance, having strong planets like Mercury and Leo can give, generally speaking, very good concentration. Heidi says, can a feeble nervous system, I think you mean feeble nervous system, be a handicap for the control of explosions? I guess you're talking about emotional explosions. Possibly, yeah. But then again, if the mind is well disciplined, then it can override some of those weaknesses. But again, the soul may have chosen some of those weaknesses to help dramatize where what needs attention, what needs looking at, what needs control, so that the discipline can be invoked. Of course, this picture here is reminiscent. You know, this the ego, the inflated ego, the inflated balloon, going up towards the sun, a bit like Icarus with his wings, who flew too close to the sun because of his arrogance or overconfidence, and of course subsequently crashed because the wax which held their feathers together melted. And here we have this hand coming in to burst his bubble, so to speak. We use that term quite a lot, don't we? People who are grandiose in their expression can be brought down to ground level, or what's the word? We have a saying in Australia called the tall poppy syndrome, where fellow Australians bring down people who are a bit inflated. So it's almost a national sport. Greg says, from a developmental perspective, as souls evolve, do we move through each of the rising signs in progressive order? No, not necessarily, Greg. I've looked at this over the years, and I don't really know, to be quite honest, but we can choose the hang on a second, I'm sorry, the rising sign you meant, yes. We can have the same rising sign for 7 incarnations in a row. DK does state that, where we develop the qualities of that rising sign more and more with each succeeding incarnation. So we can have the same, for instance, Pisces rising for 7 lifetimes, but a different sun sign for each life, because if it was the same sun sign, the crystallization of the lower self would be just too much. Gabriel says, can you say something about the mental body on the fourth subplane? What kind of meeting point is this? Well, let's just go back to that diagram for a moment. The fourth subplane on any plane is the middle subplane. There's 3 subplanes above, 3 subplanes below. And it mirrors the fourth plane as a whole, the intuitional plane, the Buddhic plane. It's the highest vehicle, if you like, or gradation of matter within the concrete mind, the fourth plane that I'm pointing to here with my, oh, hang on, down here, I beg your pardon, where the mental unit is placed upon the fourth subplane. So as that whole realm of the lower 4 subplanes has been developed, and the leading thinkers on this fourth subplane are more prone to receiving impression from the higher 3 subplanes of the higher mind or the abstract mind, and of course are moving into developing that more fully. That's the short answer. I don't want to get too complicated with the answer on that one. All right, we still have a little bit of time left. Rachel says, how can you increase or invoke a stronger will so that you can use that will to tame your emotions and concrete mind? You might want to read that book that was just pictured there, Rachel. There are many, many books around like that. Increase Your Willpower is part of the subtitle of that book. There are many, many ones around, but you have to really do a bit of looking around and see what resonates with you. And but again, books aside, just sitting and right here, just sitting and watching yourself internally, being vigilant, is a great practice. Just try sitting for 5 or 10 minutes and keep bringing your mind back to center. That is like doing push-ups. It's like working out in the gym. It's in the mental gym. Or if there's a particular course of study that you'd like to embark upon, that's going to focus your mind, something that really lights you up in terms of where you could go with that idea, or studying at a university, or studying an historic course like this, for instance, of doing the reading and the meditation that goes with it all. Because as I've mentioned many times, if we can just absorb all this knowledge, but unless we meditate, reflect upon it, chew the cud on it, so to speak, then it is not really properly integrated. The best answer I can give for now on that one. So, Agni Zaka, I can't you pronounce that, I'm sorry, call you Agni, is opening the third eye precondition to getting to the Buddhic plane. Not necessarily, because we have flashes of true intuition throughout our lives, in our waking consciousness, quite often in our dream consciousness. And I just sort of mentioned, there are plenty of books around how to open the third eye, workshops, open the third eye in a weekend workshop. I would advise against that, of forcing any development like that. But there are some things that you can do in a that are not totally harmful. Always, experiment and experience, um, but some of these guides to doing that can be misleading and harmful. So the opening of the third eye, or the opening of any chakra, happens as a matter of evolution over many, many lifetimes, naturally, as does the rising of Kundalini, for instance, which many people try and force and which creates disastrous problems.